theme. And so tonight's theme is the second session in about relationship coaching. And the intent is sort of intimate relationship coaching, or whether it be marriages or partners, but all the relationship tools apply to all relationships. So they can apply to mothers and mother-in-laws and other relationships, because the same coaching principles apply across the board. And I think that one of the things that I just love about coaching is many people come to coaching for one thing, and what they discover is that what they learn, whether it's for their job or a transition, it works for all the other things too. And so I think it's a beautiful way of approaching things differently and shifting your perspective. So I'm still letting a few people in. That's why I'm a little bit distracted here. So hopefully everyone will show up in just a moment or two. So one of the reasons to focus on relationship coaching is, as many of you know, I'm a pediatrician by training. And so when relationships in families don't do well, all the generations struggle. So not just the couple, but the children and even the grandparents. And so healthy relationships are sort of a cornerstone of physical health, emotional health, family health, and all the things. And in my experience, when those relationships don't go well, most other things don't go fantastically either. And so if we can figure out how to at least be comfortable, they don't have to be perfect, they don't have to be amazing. And I think many of us who are perfectionists and high achievers, we want everything to be amazing. They can just be okay, and they can be having a season, but taking some of the struggle out of the struggle and figuring out a way so that they don't impact everything else quite as negatively is a really beautiful thing. I also particularly gravitate towards relationship coaching because coaching really helps me in my own relationships with my partner. And we are about to celebrate 30 years of marriage. We're in a neurodiverse marriage for sure. My husband has struggled with a lot of depression, and coaching is what helps me figure out how to navigate that, and for us to move forward in a much more loving and effective way. And when he was really struggling, I tried to do what most women I know do, which was fix, manage, and control, and get everything better and help him and fix him and do all the things. And what I discovered is that I was actually making things worse. And I was also trying to fix, manage, and control my 3 teenagers. And I was a chief at work. And so I would do all of that at work, and that was my specialty. And what I really needed to do was step back so other people could step in. And that's really where coaching is different than marriage counseling and therapy. And this is something I talked about last time. When we do coaching, we work with just one person to start, and we change ourselves. And when we change ourselves, we change the energy we show up with, and everything around us shifts in that when we change. And so we're essentially creating space and creating energy and changing the way we respond to things intentionally. And then other people change. Now, they may not change in ways you like, and they may not change in ways that are acceptable to you, and then you get to decide what you want to do. But when we're waiting for someone else to change and do it in a certain way, or we want to, if I do this, you'll do that, that is not really the way we approach things in coaching. And so in coaching, it's really the power of changing yourself and the power of one. And the beautiful thing about that is that you are in control of that. So you don't have to wait for someone else to change. Although oftentimes some people, when we realize the power of one and we begin to value ourselves, so we might decide that we're not willing to wait for someone to change too. And that's also okay. So I like to think of coaching as repairing the cracks with gold. And the reason that I brought that up is, first of all, I love that Japanese pottery analogy. And I love the idea that things can be better after repairing. And that is certainly my experience with coaching, is that when we change ourselves, we can actually begin to honor and see and appreciate so many things that we didn't know were there in the beginning. And so I offer that as a vision as we're sort of thinking about coaching and thinking about how we're bringing together some of these concepts tonight. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the second session. And so a few weeks ago, I spoke a little bit more about the difference between counseling and therapy and coaching. And I gave a few tips, and I'll just throw them out there. You can, the recording of the beginning of that is on YouTube on my coaching channel, where I sent it out as an email for those of you who are on my list. But we talked about what's in your control and focusing on that, and setting an intention, and the intention and the energy that you bring to the relationship, not what we want the other person to do or how we want them to change or how we want them to appreciate us and love us, but what we're going to bring. We also talked about noticing without judgment, and this question, which is my favorite one, of what would love do and how to apply that. So today I'm kind of going to move forward from those themes and talk about a few other things. And what I'll offer is, in relationship coaching, there are so many different places to go and so many different ways to approach it that for each of these 2 sessions, I actually just kind of decided what feels relevant and important and fun to talk about in this moment. I don't see this work as, curriculum. You run through all the things. There are lots of different angles to take, and each person has a different space that they're coming from, and every relationship is coming from a different space. And so it's a matter of picking and choosing what works for you and what works for your relationship. So the first concept I wanted to bring up today, which is a little bit different than the way we often think about things, is this idea of the future and the vision actually being more important than history. So most of us are stuck on the history of how things have gone and how we got here and what our partners did in the past and maybe what we did in the past. And it's one of the reasons why coaching, again, is a little bit different than therapy, in that we look forward. So we're just like, what do you want the vision of your relationship to be? How do you want to show up for it? What do you want the future to be of the relationship? And choosing how you are going to create that. And in coaching, we do a lot of work about how we would feel if that happened and how we would think if that happened, and starting to create that reality with intention. And that's sort of a fun way. I really like to be innovative and create things. And so you can kind of think about it as a bit of a lighthearted game to try to create something that feels more aligned for you rather than having to fix something that's broken. It's also beautiful because you can come up with your own vision. Your partner doesn't have to have the same vision. It's your vision of what it will feel like to you. And it's a reminder that the past doesn't equal the future. And I think for many of us, I know almost everyone here has some relation to medicine. We always ask the past history. We're looking at the history. We're always looking for clues and how that's going to determine the future. And so this is actually stepping out of that attachment to the past and saying, okay, well, the future can be different. I can be different going forward. My partner can be different going forward. Things can be different. And then I would offer, if they're not, or your partner is not able to change, that's the information you need going forward. But sometimes we get stuck in the past. And so I love this idea of focusing future focused. The second thing I wanted to share is something I brought up a little bit of a twist of last time, but the skills that make us really good doctors and diagnosticians, they make relationships harder. And so I often talk about the training and the ways that we think make relationships harder. And I was going to bring a few different concepts today, but we are actually taught in medicine in particular that we can change other people's behavior if we say things in just the right way, or we present it in just the right way. And I think that we often bring that to our relationships. If I do this just right, my partner will change. And then we're mad at ourselves and we're mad at them. And if you really think about the way that we work with patients, that's not actually true. And it's one of the reasons that we often feel so frustrated. I'm a pediatrician, so no matter what I say, I can't necessarily convince someone to get a vaccine that they don't want, for example, or a parent to parent the way I think they should, rather than the way that maybe their culture says that they should. And so I think this idea that we can change others' behaviors gets us into trouble. We are also in medicine taught to be sort of fixers, managers, controllers, rescuers, be in charge of things, make things happen, and even focus on things that are out of our control. And so just remembering that those skills make it harder. And from the diagnosis point of view, we focus on what's wrong, what's broken. We take I, as a pediatrician, take healthy children and find things wrong with them. That's what I'm supposed to do. And so when we approach our relationships that way, it's not super healthy. We also tend to catastrophize. That's what makes a great diagnostician or someone who's looking for problems, but it doesn't help relationships feel particularly strong and stable and loving. We tend to be perfectionists too, and want other people to live up to that expectation and be, raise children in the same way we do and approach holidays and anniversaries and vacations in the same way that we do. And so we tend to, sometimes that's okay in the OR, it's okay in your clinic, but it's not necessarily something that translates well to home. And then this one is often a little bit edgy for people, but we are taught in many ways to be codependent, and to be codependent is that we can make other people feel a certain way. If you think about the way you were trained in your relationships and interactions, particularly in medicine and in a lot of healing professions, we are trained thinking that we can make other people feel a certain way. And so when they don't, we also think that they can then make us feel a certain way. And coaching steps out of that behavior and really says they feel the way they feel because of the stories they tell, and we feel the way we feel because of the stories we tell. Doesn't mean we don't want things to be a certain way. It's just realizing the thinking that we're bringing to it and the training and skills that make us really good in the exam room don't necessarily make us amazing partners. And it doesn't mean that we can't be amazing partners. It gets back to what I talked about last time, this noticing without judgment. Like, oh, that's my habit, is to focus on the negative. Oh, my habit is to always look for what's wrong. My habit is to, catastrophize. So that's just a little bit. There is so much in that category of things we were taught in medicine and as high achieving women that serve us well in some realms, but not in others. And so the key thing is the mindfulness piece. And that's actually why I call it mindful coaching, is to really step back and be mindful and notice what you're doing. And last time I was really clear on notice without judgment. So not just noticing, but notice without judgment. So the next thing I wanted to bring up this time is, I'm going to call it our nervous system problem. And most of us have a super revved up nervous system and like sympathomimetic fight or flight at baseline. And so we don't come to our relationships calm, and we have very busy lives, and our days require a lot of nervous system energy. And when we bring that nervous system, which I like to call frazzled, to our home relationships, it's really hard to flip into connection and peace and calm. And so it's, again, part of the challenge of having healthy relationships for people who do a lot of intense work in medicine, but I won't just say in medicine. I think it's in a lot of other professions, and perhaps even in the world. Thinking about COVID really led to a lot more frazzled nervous systems. And I think there are lots of things about our world these days that are impacting our nervous system. So this is, again, why I bring mindfulness into this coaching work that I do, because you can train your nervous system to be more calm. You can upregulate your parasympathetic nervous system. You can work to balance the two. And I was actually working with an ER doc this morning, and what she was saying is she just didn't realize that she couldn't even do the other work until she worked on her nervous system after COVID. And that she really, when she got more calm and when she started practicing mindfulness at baseline, and it doesn't have to be complicated, breathing and pausing and all of those things, that's where your brain is willing to change. Think about whether you're willing to change under threat, right? Our brains don't really want to accommodate, and we don't really want to think about things. And it's really hard to switch into connection. And so one of the tenets in relationship coaching is, if we want other people to connect with us, we have to connect with them. And in order for us to connect, we have to have a nervous system that's able to really, truly connect, rather than being so reactive. And so I like to think of, our nervous systems habitually react rather than respond with intention. And so training them to perhaps lengthen the pause can be really, really helpful. And then thinking we're also kind of trained as a nervous system to fix, rescue, be urgent, be on edge, to release cortisol. I know our nervous system doesn't release cortisol, but we are releasing cortisol because of how our nervous system is. And so if we can get out of that state, it's actually much easier to connect and be present, and much easier to get out of that habit of the catastrophizing. The other question I would put out to all of you is, I think many of us are this idea we're the keeper of the vibe of the relationship. And so if we're doing well, the relationship goes well. When we're not doing well, it doesn't go as well. Like we tend to be those people who come to my sessions and who are healers and high achievers. We tend to own the vibe. And so if you own the vibe, owning a more calm, present, slow, peaceful vibe is in your control. And so choosing that vibe and working on your nervous system a little bit, again, with compassion, not beating yourself up. Like none of us chose to be in this overwhelmed state. And so just sort of calming a little bit, I think can be really, really helpful. So the last thing I wanted to bring up today is sort of the problem underlying, and then I'm going to give you some tools and then we'll jump into coaching. So kind of think about if any of you are wanting coaching, we'll jump into that. But the last idea I wanted to bring up is our, and I'm going to call it our relationship with external validation. So we are all mostly addicted to external validation, meaning we want someone to tell us we're doing a good job. We want them to tell us they love us. We want them to buy us flowers or plan a trip, and that will make us feel better. And really it's a way of approaching life that we've been trained to do. If you're someone who's been in school and then went to medical school and residency and all of these things, and even if you're not in medicine, like we just love that. And so we look for that in our intimate relationships too. And the person you are with may or may not have that same relationship with external validation. And we can choose what we want to make that mean. It doesn't mean we don't ask for things we want, but it's what we decide, the story we decide to tell when we get it or don't is really what's up to us. The other thing is we have a special relationship with delayed gratification. And so we always think, okay, when that happens, I'll feel better. When they do this, I'll do that. So we're often looking for that delayed gratification, or we told ourselves when we got here in the relationship, it would be better and it's not meeting our criteria. And so we're always looking, I often talk about there's no there, but we're always looking for there and when, and it'll be better when the kids are better, or it'll be better on date night, or it'll be better on our special trip. And then there's all this energy put there rather than being in the present. And I think noticing the tiny little wins in each day can be really powerful. And then the last relationship that I thought I'd bring up tonight, and I just want to throw out, this is actually one of the tools I'm going to share, but I bring all these up with what I like to call loving amusement for our common humanity and our training and our sort of personality tendencies, because when we see them, we can change them, and we don't have to be like critical or blame ourselves. These are just habits that some of us have, and you won't all have all of them. And so this one that I bring up is victimhood. And many of us, particularly in medicine, take the victim role. And we were kind of trained to be victims as residents of people coming in and call schedules, and we're victims of the medical system. And I don't mean to belittle anyone who is actually a victim. And you might actually be a victim in a relationship or in a toxic job or whatever it might be. But my thought is that when we own that role, we give away our power and it doesn't feel good to us. And if you're a victim in your relationship of, say, and a husband who doesn't help out enough, well, then they're the villain. And how are you going to have a healthy relationship from that standpoint? And so my thought is we can opt out of that victim role. It doesn't mean we don't ask for things, but noticing where we tend to go there and how we maybe bring things from other parts of our life into that relationship, and just decide if that's who you want to be, or instead choosing, perhaps, as I offered last time, different intention. And that can be a really beautiful, different way of approaching it. Sometimes also we're victims of, I like this one, incompetent partners, or partners that aren't as efficient or productive as we are, or they don't do things right. And so we tend to get into that story and realizing how does that story impact your relationship? Because usually it's not helpful. And so the idea is not, they probably aren't as productive as you, and they probably aren't as efficient as you, and perhaps they aren't even as competent as you or responsible as you, but choosing a different story and a different relationship with who contributes what can be an incredibly powerful way to shift the energy in the relationship. And so I thought I'd switch now to just some tools. And again, I'm sort of throwing a lot of ideas out here because some things will stick with each of you. And that's one of the beautiful things about coaching is we are all different. We all have different human brains. Our partners all have different human brains, and our families are all different. And so realizing that there are different tools out there that are going to resonate with your brain, and what resonates with one person here isn't necessarily going to be the thing. But if everybody leaves with something to try, it can be really life-changing. And a lot of people will say, oh, the crack that let the light in for me was this one thing. And so just sort of take all of these tools with lightness and see which one might work for you. What do you want to try to start? And so I thought that I would start this off with this idea that the approach determines the landing. And that's like apparently a pilot thing, but I really like it as in this concept of relationships. So your approach to it is going to impacts how it all shakes out. And the approach is the energy, the intention, showing up mindfully, choosing how you are going to show up. Not necessarily what's on the ground when you land or how the other person responds or the wind, but it's how you approach your own landing and your own presence in the relationship. So the first offering today, and today I'm going to give you a few more practical things, is to pause and breathe. Most of us don't pause and breathe, we react. And so lengthening that pause by working on your parasympathetic nervous system, or literally just when you're about to lose it, it's like pause and breathe, pause and breathe. You can pause and be present, or you can pause and breathe, but it's really that moment of changing how the situation is going to go when you pause. And so when we pause, we can then decide what to do next. And so practicing the pause, we often say in mindfulness and coaching is that space between stimulus and response is where your power and control lie. That space is the pause. And so if you feel out of control and it feels like, chaos all around you, or maybe your spouse is struggling with depression, you can pause and breathe, and then you can decide what to do from there. And I encourage you, actually, any of you who don't do yoga with me, I teach yoga most weekends for free. I love it if people join me. And that is your chance to lengthen the pause and work on your nervous system. And a lot of coaching ideas get infused there. When you're more calm is when your brain is able to start thinking about things a little bit differently and shifting your perspective and shifting your stories about your partner and or your relationship. So the next tool is one of my absolute favorites, and I teach it every week in yoga, and I teach it almost every group coaching session and one-on-one coaching and all my retreats, and it's the hand to heart. And it feels a little bit woo for many of us, but the idea is that you have a heart, and our hearts, we don't often pay attention to them or listen to them. We just move through. And when you connect with this heart space, it's hard to be mean to yourself. It's hard to tell terrible stories. You can express some compassion for you. So it's really hard for us to give other people compassion and be kind and show up with love when we treat ourselves terribly. So this idea of hand to heart connects you with that. And to me, it's just a really simple way of pausing and breathing. It's also scientifically decreases the cortisol in your saliva. And so I actually like to think of it as like doing it and just watching it melt away. And it helps you be less reactive at baseline. There are also studies that show that it increases the release of oxytocin. And so that's really the skin to skin. So do it under your shirt, or at least have the dorsum of one hand hit the palm of the other hand, realizing that like you're sending feel-good hormones, you're decreasing cortisol. And if you think about it, that's going to change your ability to show up differently, get you out of that nervous system overdrive that is not your fault, but is not serving you well. So one of the other tools that I wanted to bring up is this idea of directing your brain to see the good. So our brains by default, when they're not given a direction, we go to the bad. And so when you just let your brain, you come home from work and you notice all the dishes in the sink and the things your kids haven't picked up and that your husband hasn't done this, or your, whatever, our brain goes to the negative. And then for those of us who are in medicine, we were trained to go to the negative, so we double go to the negative. And when we spend all day doing that, we come home and we do the same thing. And so one of the tools that I like to bring to relationship coaching, and you can do it anytime, is to practice directing your brain to see the good. So not just not noticing what's bad, but noticing something that went well today, or something that your partner did well today, something that you did well today, something that each of your children did well today. I often offer, the pediatrician in me says, do this at the dinner table. Like everyone gets to say one thing they did well, or one thing that someone else did well. Like your brain needs to learn to focus on that, and we need to practice it. And there are lots of different versions that I share in coaching about ways to do that for different families and different ages and different people. Different questions work better, but choosing a question that allows you to train your brain to see the good, not the bad, is a really powerful tool. It takes practice. Most of us have spent 40 plus years seeing the bad. And so realize that it takes a little bit of time. A couple of other tidbits. Humor, I think, is really helpful, and many of us don't bring in humor. And so this idea of loving amusement for your partner, like, of course they do whatever they do the way they do it. And for yourself, that like, oh, of course I noticed all the bad things that happened before I remember to notice some good thing. And like just bringing a little lightness and levity. We tend to be caught up in the seriousness of it and the frustration for a long time. And so allowing yourself to have a little bit of humor with yourself and others can be a really powerful shift. And again, it's like a crack that lets the light in. That's how I like to think about it. So 2 more tools I thought I'd bring up today. And again, these are like little intros to the tools. So there's a lot more in how you implement them, but I want you to see that there are very different ways than we were taught to approach relationships. And that when you learn some of these tools, you alone have the power to shift your experience. And I did want to say, a lot of us are like, well, why do I have to change? The other person should change. It's like, you should change because it's better for you and you'll enjoy your life more. And then if they want to change, fine. But either way, these tools help you enjoy your life. And if you change your nervous system, you're going to feel better. And if you keep a vibe that feels better, you're going to feel better. And so all of this is really for you. And then if it helps everything else, yeah, fabulous. But it again, I think just realizing we do things for ourselves. So this one, people have interesting reactions to it, but remembering that you are on the same team, especially when there's something that you're really sticky or you're really mad at your partner about how they behaved about something. And so what I like to ask is, how are they just like you? And so you can say, like, just like you, they don't want your children to get run over by a car in the street, right? You might be really super mad that they didn't manage something a certain way, or they didn't pick up in the right way, or they didn't, do something different, or maybe I'm making this up. They didn't use seatbelts in the car. Okay. And we can get really upset, but it's like, just like you, they don't want something bad to happen. And when you can connect there, you can find easier ways forward. And so I had a client once who's had a child who was super sick, and they were in India, and her husband was not behaving the way she thought he should. But when she tapped into, like, just like me, he was scared, right? His way of handling it was completely different. And she thought, of course, completely wrong. But just like her, they were both scared. And just like her, they both loved their daughter. And just like her, they wanted a good outcome. And just like her, I think when you get into that, you can start to find linkages. And so even if your husband's really struggling with something, my thought is, just like you, he doesn't, like, you don't want him to be depressed. He doesn't want to be depressed, for example, right? You have different ways of going about it. Or I think sometimes we separate ourselves and we notice how we're different. And so that's one of the more challenging tools to implement. And it's also one of the absolute most useful ways of reconnecting with a partner. Many of us who are high achieving women We think our way's the right way about everything in marriages and parenting. And so I think this is why this one's so helpful. When they're just like you, they want a good outcome. They have a different way of doing it. And we're like, yes, but I'm right. But I do think that if you could just remember that just like you, they want something the same, it's really, really helpful. The last one I wanted to bring up is this idea of a want match. And this has been super helpful for me. I think many of us want our partners to be a want match for everything. And so meaning they're going to fill all the roles. And they should be, a good intimate partner, a perfect dad. They should also want to go for walks with you. They should want to help with the holidays or Christmas, or they should be a vacation planner. They should want to talk through difficult situations with you. They might be and realizing that we can have want matches. So you can have a friend who's a walking partner and someone else who likes planning trips and someone else who, so maybe your spouse is a want match for cooking, or maybe your spouse is a want match on parenting, but they're not a want match on financial planning. And I think when we can realize that we can have different want matches and have different relationships and different people fill these gaps, it can create this tremendous space in there. And because many of us are perfectionists, we're like, yeah, but I can be a want match for all those things. But it's very likely that your partner can't be a want match for you in all those things. And so gifting your relationship space and all these other delightful want matches, life gets much better. Then you start thinking like, who's my want match for that? And who's my want match for travel? Like maybe your partner doesn't like to travel, or maybe your partner doesn't like to go to noisy restaurants, or when your partner, for example, is struggling with depression, or maybe they are neurodiverse, maybe they're not the person to go to like the holiday party with you, but maybe you can go with someone else. And rather than sticking into the frustration of that, you can just decide they're not your want match for that. They also might not be like your house cleaning want match or your cooking want match, and that can be okay. And when we separate out from that, we can find space where relationships can work better. And again, I want to offer, a lot of people say, oh, well, it's Pollyanna, you're just giving them a pass. And my thought is you're figuring out what they can do and what you can be okay with, and then you can decide what you want to do. But most of us come at it from the fixing, managing, controlling, and playing all the roles. And that's exhausting for us, and it's exhausting for others. So creating space and letting them be them and you be you can actually, like, amazing things can grow. You're sort of cultivating a garden and seeing what grows. And then if you don't like it, you can move. And I'm not an advocate of necessarily moving. What I have found is that most people, when they learn a lot of these tools, the relationships get much better and they enjoy it a lot more. Some people are like, yeah, and actually this isn't what I want. Or now, I understand better the nature of who I am and who this person is, and we're not actually a want match in any capacity. And then but you don't want to be moving on just being mad at them that they're not meeting your expectations and this isn't the way it was supposed to be and they're not showing you the love in the way that you want. And so it's the same thing actually with job relationships, right? You want to get to a point where like, this is the way it is, and I have done my part, and now what do I want? Maybe you want something different, or maybe this is good enough. I think the last bit that I'll throw in here is that many of us who are high achievers think that like our relationship, just like our job has to be amazing, our relationship's supposed to be amazing. But it can be good enough and it can serve certain purposes, and just realize that like not everything has to be perfect and amazing and or fixed all at once. And so maybe for right now, it's not the season of intimacy because you have 3 little kids and 2 busy jobs and all kinds of other things, but maybe it's good enough for now. Or maybe it's not, and you're just like, this is not in integrity with me. The big piece of that is knowing who you are and worrying more about yourself than the other person. So that is sort of what I was going to say at the beginning. And I would love to answer questions, and I'm happy to do some coaching if anyone wants. I will turn off the recording also. And I do want to offer that part of the reason I do these free sessions is I'm going to offer, I do a relationship small group coaching program, and I'm going to be doing it starting at the end of March. And I haven't done it in a couple of years, but I felt inspired to do it. And so for anyone who wants to join me, really what we do is do sessions like this and really get into individual coaching in a small group, and so that you can kind of work through your own issues. And I run through all the tools, which are a lot more tools than we talked about today, as well as it being sort of a supportive environment. I think many of us tell these stories that you know, our relationships are worse than others and they're not as fixable, and that, you know, we're sort of stuck. And one of the things that I have found in these smaller groups is that we realize that none of us are alone, and a lot of us are bringing similar thought patterns that are causing us pain. And so it isn't that your relationship will become amazing, but you'll stop struggling so much about it. And in that space, it can become the best relationship that it can. So let me turn off the recording and